So let's get started. I've decided I'm going to give you a lecture on the coronavirus pandemic on Thursday, and as a result of that, I'm going to reduce the 3 lectures on networks and social capital to 2. As a result of this, as you can see, what we're going to do is we're going to postpone the neighborhood effects lecture until after the break. All the readings for that are staying the same, and I'll deliver that lecture as usual. The 2 social network lectures will be compressed. This lecture will take place on this date, and we'll call it Social Network Structure and Function. There used to be 2 lectures. We've eliminated 4 readings, 4 article readings across those 2, okay? And you have to just read these chapters of my book for that lecture, okay? And then the following day, as planned, we'll have social network interactions with the same readings, but we've eliminated 1 reading, all right? All this will be on the website, and then we'll resume a normal schedule. For the coronavirus lecture next week, please watch the movie. Raise your hands if you've seen Contagion. Raise your hands if you have not seen Contagion. Please watch Contagion for Thursday, okay? It's very Hollywoodized, but there are many, many elements that are extremely realistic about, I mean, the extent of the pandemic surpasses what we think is likely to happen in the United States. But there are many realistic elements. In addition, I've done several TED Talks. Watch in particular this one. Okay? The TED Talk called How Social Networks Predict Epidemics. Okay? It was done on the TED main stage in Cannes. So this is the one I want you to watch. It's 18 minutes. Please also watch that in advance of the lecture on Thursday. Okay? So very, very easy. Fewer readings total for the class, a movie instead, and a coronavirus lecture. I'm actually very concerned about coronavirus. And it's difficult for me. It's been very difficult for me for a month now. My laboratory started working on the epidemic on the 24th of January with some Chinese colleagues. And I'll tell you about that work on Thursday. And we are redirecting the efforts of my lab in a number of ways to try to build tools to help our country in this situation. One of them with a Yale undergrad of computer science, we're going to launch an app, which I'm going to tell you about on Thursday, and I actually hope you guys will sign up for, that will help track the epidemic at Yale and also help reduce spread at Yale, okay? I did something similar when I was at Harvard 10 years ago for the H1N1, but that was before apps were widely available. We did that in a completely different way. You'll hear about that in this TED Talk. And then once I tell you about the app, I don't think we'll be ready because we have to wait for the App Store to approve it. I don't think I'll be able to let you sign up on Thursday, but we will email the class list over break so you can sign up so that by the time Yale students come back after the break, at least that tool will be available. And in addition, my laboratory is doing a bunch of other stuff to help with the situation. Now the difficulty is, and I'll talk all about this on Thursday, you know, it was very clear to us, or at least to me, on the 24th that, you know, we were on a flat phase of an epidemic that could be pandemic, the 24th of January. And if you just think about this idea, the Chinese have 700 million people under house arrest for over a month. Just think about that. That's the force, that's the social force that's been required to keep the epidemic flat in China. They've reduced themselves to 50 cases per day, which is unbelievable. But think about the power that had to be exercised to stop it. And we're not doing anything like that in our society. Today, in Italy, doctors are being called out of retirement to take care of patients. 9% of affected individuals, now the epidemic's still small there, about 1,000 or so, but epidemics, that's what epidemics do. They just sort of, they don't seem like much is happening, and then they explode. And the problem is, you don't want to be alarmist. Like, I don't want to be alarmist. I want you to stay calm. We've had epidemics, we've had pandemics before. The CDC released an incredible report in 2017 about how to prepare for pandemics. So I don't want anyone to like freak out. But at the same time, I don't want you to be complacent because you look around and you think, oh, nothing's happening. Yes, nothing happens for a long time until then something happens, okay? That's what happens with epidemics. So that's why I want you alert, concerned. I want you to start implementing social distancing. So don't hug or shake hands with each other. Yale's already reducing non-essential travel. I think that's prudent. There are a lot of other plans afoot for what to do if the situation gets worse. So the dilemma with people who are involved in this type of work is that you don't want to be alarmist, and you certainly don't want to be called a chicken little. Like, I don't want to be sitting in front of you 2 months from now and you think, oh, look at that loser professor, thought there was going to be a horrible disaster, and there was no disaster. So I'm not telling you there's going to be a horrible disaster. That's not what I'm saying. But equally, I don't want to be sitting here in 2 months and you guys are saying, why didn't you tell us, you know, you're supposed to be an expert about public health. Didn't you study anything in college? And so, or medical school, or public health school, or PhD school, or spent 25 years studying this stuff. So it's very hard to calibrate, okay? So I guess the message I'm telling you is, it's a concerning pandemic. We've had them before, and on Thursday I'll educate you about like how this one is similar to and differs from other ones. We know what to do. Eventually there'll be a vaccine. People in your particular age group seem to be spared on this one, so I don't think you're facing any personal risk. But you can transmit it, like, you know, you can get it and then give it to your grandparents or your neighbors or to others. So it's not a pleasant thing. Anyway, watch the movie Contagion. It's very Hollywoodized. You know, it's a little bit alarmist. Oh, and then the probability, just to frame, when you see Contagion, the experts estimate that the probability of an occurrence like that depicted in Contagion is only about 1 in 1,000, between 1 in 500 and 1 in 2,000 with this current pandemic, okay? But when you see the movie, you'll see, oh my God, that's really bad, what happened in Contagion. So 1 in 500 to 1 in 2,000 of a really bad outcome is something we should pay attention to as a nation. You understand what I'm saying? I'm not convinced that this administration knows what the hell it's doing, the American in the White House, but our CDC is miraculous. Okay, we have the best epidemiologists in the world, but they need to do their jobs. All right, any questions about, and I'll talk to you at length about coronavirus on Thursday. Any questions about coronavirus? Or anything else? So I do not want you leaving this classroom saying, Professor Christakis says we're doomed. Okay, please do not do that. That's not what I'm saying. All right? Just saying, it's serious. We need to take it seriously. We know what to do. All right? Okay, I'll talk more on Thursday about all of this stuff. Okay, so any questions about the material, leaving out the coronavirus stuff? All right, last time we discussed a gradient in health along socioeconomic status, the hierarchy of socioeconomic status, and we examined the shape of the income-health relationship. We reviewed Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the importance of autonomy and social integration. So it's not just, you know, the whole man does not live by bread alone idea. We don't just need food and shelter. We have these higher needs, and it's the fact that biologically we have these higher needs that results in socioeconomic gradient, which is inevitable in the natural lottery, in creating the structuring of health, such that people at the bottom, which means there's always a bottom and a top, even if the bottom is well fed, they have other needs which aren't met, which gives you this gradient, which is sort of unavoidable. We considered but mitigatable. We considered the biological pathways by which the stress of social hierarchy can affect our bodies, and we talked about this issue of absolute versus relative deprivation, the latter of which is an unavoidable byproduct of the intrinsic nature hierarchy, which arises both from the natural lottery and from our biological origins as social animals. Now today we're going to be considering the salubrious nature of social support. And this sets the stage for the work we're going to discuss about social networks after we return from break. To what extent and how are social connections beneficial? But first, continuing the topic we started last time regarding the health effects of hierarchy, let's look at this idea. What we really want, or would want, is to do an experiment where we somehow randomize people to have a higher status. If we could do an experiment, we randomly assign, you guys are going to have high status and you guys are going to have low status. And to see how it affects their health, for example, their life expectancy. Now such experiments have been done with primates, experimentally manipulating where their status hierarchy is or what their social standing is. But here's a clever idea that was done by Don Riddlemeyer, a rather fantastic epidemiologist I've known for 30 years. What he did is he matched samples of actors, nominees, and winners of Academy Award. And what he found was the following. So he looks at what's the benefits of being on top? What happens if you win an Academy Award? Does it make you live longer? So he looked at actors in general, and he looked at actors that had appeared. He did a match study where he looked at actors that had appeared with the index actor in a movie, for instance. So they both appeared in the same movie, they were similar age and sex and whatever else. He looked at people who were nominated for the Academy Award, again matched to others, and he looked at the winners. And he found that the winners had 3.6 years of life expectancy added. Winning an Academy Award seemed to lengthen your life, being on top. And, or about a 25% reduction in death rate compared to nominees, and there's the 95% confidence interval. Now what's a possible threat to that inference? If I told you that winning an award adds 3.6 years to your life and you wanted to be skeptical about that claim, what would be, how might you express your skepticism, or what might be a concern about that? Stephen?
Yeah, there could be some type of third variable that...
Yeah, like what?
Money.
What?
Socioeconomic.
I can't hear you. Socioeconomic. So among the actors, you think richer actors are going to be more likely to win the prize among the nominees? You're on the right track, but it's probably not money. What could it be? Something about popularity, yeah. Is that Jewel? Lila. Move to the right a little bit, yeah.
Race? Is there a
Could be, to the extent that blacks live less long than whites. But the nominees, but the whites, no, that would work in the opposite direction. You're on the right track. Other ideas? Yes. Jalen.
Yes. Could it be happiness, overall happiness and satisfaction with their careers?
Something like that, yeah. So it could be something. So you got 5 nominees, and the Academy picks one guy for the prize. Maybe the guy they pick for the prize is already happier and friendlier. People like this guy. Maybe he's richer, as Stephen mentioned. Or race, I don't think is an issue in this case. Or maybe that person is just handsomer. These are all handsome people. They're all actors. But maybe he's handsomer, and maybe if you're handsomer, you've got like better genes that make you, healthier, for example, okay? Maybe you're taller, maybe the tall guy, or something else. So maybe it's something else that actually, not random, that moves you from one category to the other. Maybe this person would have lived longer, even if they hadn't won the prize, for example. So it's always hard to be sure in these non-experimental, sort of natural experiments that you might do. A more recent and better conducted study looked at Nobel laureates and nominees from 1900 to 1950. Very similar study, but with better methods. And the Nobel laureate nominations are a little bit better because the nominees are typically unknown to the nominee or to anyone else for 50 years, okay? So it looks like benefits of winning the Nobel Prize. This shows life expectancy for the 524 male physics and chemistry Nobel nominees. The nominees lived this long. They might not have, typically would not know that they were nominated. No one else knew. And the winners lived this long. So 1.4 years gain, or again, a 26% reduction in the hazard of death in a proportional hazard model compared to nominees. And there's the confidence interval. So something about if we could sort of randomly say, okay, you guys are going to get a prize, and you're going to be like widely admired, okay? And maybe there's some money in it too, or other kinds of wonderful things happen because you do that. You're going to live, let's say, longer as a result of that than the rest of you that, let's say, don't get this higher status randomly assigned to you. But we can also imagine large-scale natural experiments, randomizing people to economic conditions. We saw some similar ideas when we looked at lottery winners in health a few lectures ago, but here's another example. Whether you graduate into a recession affects your long-term wages and your psychological makeup, and probably your health as well. I've mentioned this idea before in this class, but the gist of this idea is that people have looked at if by dumb luck you guys happen to graduate the year there's economic depression, you basically never recover. Your wages never recover, your attitude about yourself never recovers. I'm not saying this is a huge effect, but it's a discernible effect. Compared to another chance occurrence, which is you graduate into a booming economy. Okay? Right from the start, you make more money, you feel, wow, it's amazing, look, I got this great job, I'm feeling very fulfilled, and so forth, okay? And of course, you have no control over that, that's just randomly assigned. It's not like your particular talents resulted in the American economy collapsing, or lack thereof, collapsing the year you graduate, okay? So this looks at narcissism, like how narcissistic are you, like how much do you feel like you're the greatest thing that ever happened, versus the unemployment rate at the period of time when you emerge into adulthood. And unsurprisingly, the higher the unemployment, the lower the unemployment rate, the better you feel about yourself. You think you're just terrific because you happen to graduate at a time when unemployment was low. Okay? So you might generalize from that. So this is really another structural effect that transcends the agency here. Okay? Yet another example of this fundamental idea we've been discussing this whole semester. Now we want such natural or deliberate experiments because we want to sort out causation. And as we saw in the case of socioeconomic status and health, and as we saw in the prior lecture as well, not only can there be two-way causation, but it can be more complicated still, where there is some third factor that is causing both outcomes. And that is what these prior two observational studies tried to address using statistical methods and using a kind of natural experiment. So, maybe we want to claim that winning an award or having high status causes longevity, but maybe it's longevity that causes you to win an award. I didn't mention that yet, but that's obvious. If you die young, you never can win a damn thing. But if you live a long time, maybe you have a chance, or maybe there's some personality, appearance, or intelligence, or some other attributes that cause you both to win an award or have high status and to live a long time. So we'd like to do some experiments if we could. Now, we might, in a sense, want to randomize people to different statuses and see how they responded to this stress. Now, one of the most famous and now much revisited and possibly debunked or rejected studies in this regard is something known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. Raise your hands if you've heard about this before. Almost all of you. Okay, so I'm curious, where? In a psychology class, or what kind of classes have you been taught that? In psych? Raise your hands if it wasn't in psych that you heard it. Yeah, which class?
I just opened a book that I was reading.
You read about it. Other places you encountered this idea. Yeah? History, okay. Okay, so this is widely known. It's being really debated right now, so some people think that actually the study was wrongly coded and so forth. The gist of the idea was that Zimbardo, who was a psychology professor at Stanford, was very interested in this period of time, like what would happen if you put people in these situations. So this was in 1971. He got 24 student volunteers who were screened for their physical and mental health, and they were randomly assigned to be prisoners or guards. And they converted the Stanford psychology department into a prison, like a fake prison. And then the students, they send out the fake cops to the students' places of residence, and the students were arrested publicly. They were put into handcuffs, and they were trotted into this prison, and then they were put through a bunch of humiliating experiences. They were forced to wear these kinds of gowns. Later on, they were put into, wearing forced to wear bags over this and so forth. The cops are even adopting this mirrored sunglasses. They're really getting into the role, and so they're put into this type of a situation. And very quickly, it is said, the students and the guards started assuming stereotypical behaviors. The guards started getting more and more brutal to their classmates, treating them brutally. And one of the students thought, this is stupid, one of the so-called prisoners, let's have an insurrection. And they kind of refused to come out when they were supposed to come out and barricaded the doors. The guards very quickly escalated to force. They didn't like having their authority questioned, and they started being brutal to the other prisoners. Some of the prisoners started feeling really awful about themselves, like getting into a fetal position, whimpering, and the professor conducting the study kept doing the study, it is said, until his girlfriend visited him in the laboratory and said, Phil, what the hell are you doing here? Look, these are Stanford students that are now in a total, crazy state. You've got half of them being brutal guards, half of them being brutalized prisoners. You've got to stop the experiment. Which is, the story goes, when Zimbardo stopped the experiment because his girlfriend told him to do so. So the idea here is that you could just, by chance, be assigned to one status over another, and as a result, have these sort of outcomes. Of course, a lot more is going on here. This is one of the most thoroughly excavated studies. People are now going back and listening to transcripts and alleging that Zimbardo falsely engineered, it wasn't as random as thought, and so forth. But that's not my point. My point is that this demonstration, it gives you a sort of this event, which was a demonstration of a phenomenon, even if it wasn't a true experiment, gives you an illustration of what sort of might be needed to actually randomly assign humans to different statuses. And as I said, we can also do experiments with other primates manipulating their rank. In humans and other primates, adverse social environments often translate into lasting physiological costs. These investigators explored an experimental system that consisted of 10 social groups of female macaques, in which each individual's social status, that is to say their dominance rank, could be experimentally controlled. And in this paradigm, they were able to show that dominance rank results in widespread, yet plastic imprint on gene regulation, such that peripheral blood mononuclear cell gene expression, so those are white blood cells, your mononucleocytes, that were expressing various sorts of genes, alone could predict the social status with 80% accuracy. You could tell a primate's rank from which genes were turned on and off. And what they did here is they grouped subjects according to their dominance rank, showing the frequency of threatening encounters. That's in panel A. So here's the aggression received per half-hour period. These high-ranked individuals don't receive much aggression. The low-ranked individuals do. Remember, we talked about humans the last time, about people at the bottom. They sit at the foot of this pyramid. So everyone, the guy at the top sort of administers threats and brutality to the people just below him, who in turn can administer threats and brutality to people below them. So the people at the bottom, they get all of this crap that's flowing downhill. So here, as you can see that in these macaques, and then they looked at the upregulated, what genes were upregulated in high-ranking females and upregulated in low-ranking females. So these are gene expression profiles, which you can just visually see are very different. These genes of the females at the top had different genes upregulated compared to the females at the bottom. And then they experimentally manipulated the ranks and found that the gene patterns followed. And they could predict the ranks based on the regulation pattern of the genes. So I could tell which female had high rank or low rank based on the overall pattern of which genes were up or down regulated. And so they explored the mechanistic implications of these effects using gene expression profiling and also some glucocorticoid resistance assays, those are stress hormones, which together demonstrated rank effects on gene expression levels for about 70% of 1,000 rank-related genes. So they were able to demonstrate a molecular response to social conditions, particularly the immune system, and demonstrate a key role for gene regulation in linking the social environment to individual physiology. I've been dying to do experiments like this with humans for like 20 years, figure out a way to do this. I haven't been able to figure out an experiment that we can do, but we've done some proxies for that, looking at, for instance, how your social position is associated with various biomarkers in your body. So we published some work on this topic. So to summarize where we are now, low socioeconomic status or low income can be linked to poor individual and population health in several ways. Those in the lowest group may have worse health because they lack the resources to acquire health. For example, poor nutrition or poor housing. And this is the neo-material explanation that we discussed in the last couple of lectures, and this happens. There's no doubt about it. Your absolute rank matters for your health. But as we have seen, this cannot explain the gradient in health that's seen even in the upper ranks of a socioeconomic status distribution. Moreover, those in the lowest group may in fact have adequate resources in an absolute sense, but they may still suffer because of their relative position. Being at the bottom is bad regardless of one's absolute circumstances. And this is one of the ways that income inequality might in fact be harmful. Perceptions of being relatively deprived are also stressful with respect to their psychosocial factors, and possibly may be just as important as the material factors and can play a role in ill health. Moreover, being at the bottom can interfere with your capabilities, as we saw the last time with some of the examples I gave you about dating and vacation time and all of that stuff. You know, being at the bottom can interfere with your capacity to realize what's best for you. So these types of effects refer to the sort of psychosocial explanation for the relationship between status and health outcomes. And finally, it's possible that not just those at the bottom, but everyone suffers from income inequality, for example, or other effects by underinvestment in public goods, as we saw, for example, with pollution or public education. So, we can link population socioeconomic status to individual and population health by looking at absolute deprivation or relative deprivation. And at a community level, we can see how there are structures that might affect everyone both those at the top and those at the bottom in a variety of ways. And one simple example of that was the idea that if we have high inequality, we may not, for example, take care of our public parks, for example. The rich may say, why should I pay taxes to provide safe transportation and nice green space for everyone? I can pay for that myself. So underinvestment in public goods takes place, the commons collapses, everyone suffers, as it turns out, both those at the bottom and those at the top. So, how do humans cope with stress, whether it originates from physical or social circumstances? And again, we already saw last time in primates that social support and interaction can mitigate the adverse consequences of hierarchy. And coping strategies, beyond biological ones, can consist of a variety of behavioral or cognitive attempts to manage specific, stressful, situational demands. You can draw on personal resources of various kinds to do this. So how do you cope with stress? Well, there's a biological response. Your body does something when you're stressed. We'll talk about that. There's a cognitive response. You think something when you're stressed. There's a behavioral response. You do something when you're stressed. And there's a social response. You do something with respect to others, and others do something with respect to you when you are placed under some kind of stress. Single-mindedly, if you can actually do something about the problem, you draw on behavioral resources, you change your actions to fix it. And if not, you develop a sense of personal mastery cognitively and psychologically. So maybe if you can't stop the problem, you change your mind about the problem. Or you can draw on social support to buffer the impact of the stress upon you. Now, interestingly, evidence suggests that just perceived support can be as important as actual support. And this is kind of a really depressing and even crazy observation. Basically, if you think people like you, it's as good as if they actually like you. If you think you have many friends, it's as good as if you actually have many friends. And this is really kind of a bummer for someone like me who's really interested in social networks, because it just imagines that fictions in your mind can have as big of an impact at mitigating the impact of stress on your well-being as the actual reality of your social interactions. So, having a significant other is a key measure of social support. So let's begin to turn to the very considerable importance of social support and social networks to your health. A classic study in this regard was conducted by a famous sociologist by the name of Emil Durkheim, who looked at suicide over 100 years ago. And he suggested that people living in more socially isolating societies, that is to say less integrated ones, were more likely to take their own lives. And you may remember that we began the class with this example of suicide. In fact, there's a long history of work looking at the risk of suicide and how that relates to the extent of one's social connections. Here are results from a more recent study looking at both suicide and a traumatic death, because reckless behavior is sometimes hard to distinguish from suicide in men. So sometimes when you read about a young man who had died in a car accident, it might not have been an accident. He might actually have intended to take his own life. So this study shows social connection and relative risk of traumatic death and suicide among men. This is a relative risk. This means there's higher risk versus lower. If they're not married, it's here. If they have no close relatives, it's here. If they do not belong to a church, it's increased. This is compared to people who have social connections. So being unmarried is a risk factor for killing yourself. Having no close relatives is a risk factor. Not belonging to a place of worship is a risk factor for traumatic death or suicide. And in fact, more generally, there's a wealth of literature over the past few decades that has confirmed that social connectedness is beneficial. This is a classic summary taken from your readings looking at the individual risk of death in men and the nature of this effect, that is to say, how does your social connection enhance your prospects, enhance your longevity? The nature of how that happens might depend on the environment. For example, in Tecumseh, Evans County in Finland, which are more rural, there's a nonlinear effect, as if there's a threshold for men. And it's as if social integration is especially important or remains important across the whole spectrum to men living in cities. cities. However, there's a consistent graded pattern regarding across a broad range of studies. So if you just look at this, it shows the average age-adjusted mortality rate according to the level of social integration measured in some way, from low versus high. So people that have low social integration are at greater risk of death in all of these studies. But if you look at some of the rural studies, it looks like after a certain point, like in eastern Finland or in Tecumseh, for example, then the curve flattens out. So like right around here, somewhere in the middle, comes down dramatically as you get more socially integrated, and then afterwards it doesn't seem to make much more of an intervention. And it also seems that for cities, like in Gothenburg, for example, it keeps coming down. So there's a continuous impact. This is all in men. So social integration matters no matter where you are. It may matter more in cities than in rural areas. And in rural areas, there may be a step function, and in cities, it may be continuous. Okay? These aren't certainties, but these are sort of some summaries about what you might observe about men and social integration. Now, the story is somehow, and these effects might be stronger, these social integration effects might be stronger even than whether you smoke or not. Whether you have someone who loves you can benefit your life much more than whether you don't smoke or not. And the female risk factors are smaller than men, especially in rural populations. So if you look at the pattern of women, it's rather different. Flatter, lower, less evidence of this cut point. Now, the single most important source of social support in the lives of adults is whether they have an intimate partner, typically a spouse. So, for example, if you look at studies, this is old work by a famous demographer by the name of Linda Waite. If you look at the probability of survival versus age, and you look at, for example, this is what's happening in the married people, this is the widowed people, this is the divorced people, and here the never married people. They're always faring worse. They're always less likely to survive at any given time point. And our best estimates, using such data, is that if we could randomize men to be married to randomly chosen women, okay, so two-stage randomization. First, we pick you guys, and you guys will randomly be assigned to be married, and you guys will not. But you don't get to pick your spouse. We pick a random spouse for you, and so we randomly give you a mate. Among men, our best estimate is that it would add 7 years to a man's life. Among women, people say, oh, maybe it takes 7 years away from women. No, it doesn't. Among women, if we could randomly assign women to be married to randomly chosen men, we estimate that it would add 2 years to a woman's life. So marriage is more beneficial for men than it is for women. Heterosexual marriage. It's very difficult to do these estimates for homosexual marriages, but to the extent that we can, there's suggestive evidence that if we could randomly assign men to be married to randomly chosen men, they would each gain about 2 years to their lives. So this suggests that it's not marriage per se that is salubrious, it's marriage to a woman that is salubrious. Do you understand? Something about being united to a female may be enhancing longevity in both men and women in our society. So these are very difficult to estimate these because obviously we could never do such experiments. In real life, we have to rely on observational data that takes advantage of certain things. For example, we can rely on catastrophes like after the First World War, where most of the men died and only some women were even able to partner with each other. And then to see what happened to, if women were prohibited the opportunity to get married, did their longevity in women decline compared to the women who were able to get married in a time of shortage of men, for instance, after the First World War. Some people have also begun to look at marriage in polygynous societies, like what happens if you're assigned one wife, if you're a man, that improves your life. What if you get a second wife? Is that like even better for your life than just one wife, for example? It's difficult to sort out those effects, obviously, for reasons you can imagine. Now, entry into marriage is helpful, and exit from marriage is harmful. The widower effect, or the increased probability of the recently bereaved to die, is a well-known demographic phenomenon. So, entry into marriage is good for you, good for men, good for women. What happens when your spouse dies? It's bad for you. multiple studies, hundreds of studies over hundreds of years now, have looked at this. It's more pronounced in men than women. That is to say, men suffer more when their wives die than women suffer in terms of their risk of death. So a man, when his wife dies, his risk of death goes up. A woman, when his husband dies, her risk of death goes up, but not as much. The relative risk of death in men is between 1.3 and 2, so during the period of widowhood, men's risk of death might as much as double. And the mechanism is felt to be multifaceted. A whole bunch of different things are going on. That is to say, when your wife dies, if you're a man, all kinds of the mechanisms might relate to what your wife was doing for you. Maybe she was feeding you more nutritious food. Maybe she was connecting you to a social world. Maybe she was telling you to drive more safely. All kinds of effects might happen. And for women, different kinds of effects. We'll get to that in a moment. This is actually a canonical finding in the social sciences dating back to 1858 by when William Farr first studied this topic. And like Durkheim and suicide, the incest taboo, and the law of supply and demand, the widowhood effect is like one of those fundamental stylized facts. We find it again and again around the world in societies organized all kinds of different ways, in developed and non-developed societies and so forth. It's a basic fact about our existence. It's seen everywhere, almost everywhere, and at all times by and large, and it's supported by countless observational studies. This idea that when your spouse dies, your health suffers. Now, this is what we might summarize as the timing of benefits, of the health benefits of marriage. Let's look at the men. Here's the risk of death. Here's higher risk and lower risk. Here's time. So here are the guys who are sort of cruising along, and then they get married. And when they get married, they have a very abrupt and precipitous drop in their risk of death. Some demographers have called this the getting rid of the motorcycle in the garage phenomenon. So when you get married, your wife says to you, you know, Nicholas, sorry, you just can't drive your motorcycle anymore. It's out of here, you know, or you gotta get rid of your guns, or, you know, you just can't stay out drinking with your buddies till 2 in the morning anymore. You gotta shape up, okay? So this is repeatedly seen, a very abrupt decline of risk of death in men upon entry into marriage, which persists until such time as their wife dies. And when their wife dies, there's a rapid spike within months, within weeks, in your risk of death in men, followed by a very slow decay, okay, such that if you're, after my wife dies, my risk of death is elevated for many months afterwards, and then it flattens out my risk, but it never returns to baseline. I'm always at greater risk of death in the widowed state than I would have been if my wife had not died. Is everyone with me still? I'm summarizing an enormous literature and making a bit of a cartoon of it, but that's the gist. And there's no way to talk about this without using kind of a heterosexist perspective, so indulge that as well. And part of the reason it's so difficult to look at homosexual unions is that all the data that we have occurred during the time of the HIV epidemic, which decimated gay men. So it's very difficult to go in and look at these phenomena amongst gay men. We didn't have public records about gay marriage before, but even if you could form the unions, the populations were decimated. People are beginning to do the work. We can talk about it if you're interested. Now let's look at women. Women have a lower risk of death than men. Remember, we talked about how this is one of the fundamental injustices about social life, is that men don't live as long as women. It's awful, right? Isn't it awful? Anyway, so the women don't live as long. The women live longer, so their risk of death is lower. When they enter into marriage, they don't get as much of a benefit, okay? And it's slower in onset, all right? It takes longer for the benefits to accrue. In the generation of your parents, the principal way that entering into marriage benefited women was by enhancing their economic status. Now that's changing as gender norms have changed in the last generation, but in prior generations, the reason women benefited from entering into marriage, the men benefited because their behavior improved. I'm summarizing the caricature in literature, but the women benefited because their economic circumstances improved. This is in your parent generation. Your generation will be different. Although even there it's not entirely clear if you look at Swedish data. And the Swedes have had more equal gender norms for longer than Americans have. Anyway, the women have a slower improvement, but it improves. And then when their spouse dies, like I told you earlier, they do fare worse, but not as much. And it doesn't spike as rapidly. Although once they've lost their husband, this line is lower than this line. They have a lower risk of death, higher risk of death after loss of their spouse, even in women. So this is a cartoon summary of what happens with respect to marriage, which is the primary relationship. 96% of adults get married in anyone's life. Now, from nearly the beginning, when this was first examined in the 18th century, in the 1740s, some monks, there was a big debate, a big theological debate in Europe about whether going into a monastery and entering this holy state of being untethered to and not having sex with someone else, whether this would improve your health. So all the Catholic and other orders wanted to say, this is a pure state for human beings, they will live longer. The monks and the nuns will live longer. So all these people were very interested in this topic, and then in 1749, some Dutch mathematicians said, let's take a look and see. And what they found was that actually the monks lived less long. This was like really a problem for the theology that was ascendant at the time, when they found that the nuns and the monks were not living as long as the people who were not in this holy state of celibacy. So right away, from 1749, when serious thinkers, mathematicians began to think about this, they imagined that, well, there could be a bunch of things going on here. So the first question is, there are three possible explanations for the relationship between health and marital status. One idea is that it's causal. Entry into marriage improves your health. Okay, that's one idea. That's the tendency of the married to get healthy. The second idea is homogamy of the marriage of like and like. This is the tendency of the healthy to get married. Maybe when you're out in the marriage market, healthy people are able to get a spouse and unhealthy people are not. Furthermore, healthy people are better able, when they get a spouse, to get a healthy spouse. And unhealthy people cannot get a spouse or get an unhealthy spouse. So therefore, it's not my living longer when I'm married. It's not because my wife is doing something for me. It's just simply a marker. My being married is simply a marker that I was healthier to begin with. I was healthy to begin with. I was able to get a spouse. Oh, I live longer. But it's not because of my spouse. Do you understand? Okay? So that's the homogamy explanation. It's not a causal explanation. And the third possibility is confounding. Maybe there's something else that's improving my health and my wife's health at the same time, or improving my prospects for marriage and my health at the same time. A trivial example of this might be what's known as the radon in the basement hypothesis. So maybe there's radon in the basement. It's killing me and my wife at the same time. So when I die, my wife's risk of death goes up, but not because she's been deprived of me, but rather because she and I both had exposure to something toxic. Okay? So my death is simply a marker for our shared exposure to a toxic substance. So this slide shows the expected association between the mortality. So my partner, a graduate student of mine, graduate students in TFs pay attention. A graduate student of mine, Felix Elward, who's now a professor at the University of Wisconsin, he and I were trying to think about, well, what could be some experiments to tell the difference, some natural experiments. And we said, what about, so if it's the case that a man's wife dying is bad for him, actually kills him, versus the death of his wife is simply a marker that he has bad health. That is to say, he was unable to marry a healthy wife because he was unhealthy. So now his wife dies. So all that means is that's just a marker of unobserved poor health in the man. What if his ex-wife dies? Now, we don't think that the death of your ex-wife harms you. Those of you that have ex-boyfriends and ex-girlfriends, you probably don't care at all what happens to your ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend. Maybe you do. Maybe you want them to suffer. But the point is that whatever they're doing doesn't affect you the same way your current boyfriend or current girlfriend affect you, right? So if it's something that the partner is doing for the spouse right now, the death of the ex-wife should not harm you. But if it's a marker for your healthiness, that is to say, in the past you were able to marry a really healthy person, there should be a signal. The death of your ex-wife should still harm you, even if it's years later. That we should still measure the fact that your risk of death will be higher than people whose ex-wives have not died. Do you understand the reasoning? Is everyone with me still? So we did this study where we assembled triplicates of men and their wives and their ex-wives, and compared the impact of the death of a current wife and the death of an ex-wife under different sorts of scenarios. So a plus sign here denotes a positive expected association. So we looked at current wife and husband. So this is distinguishing between causation, homogamy, and confounding the widow effect. So do we expect, if your current wife dies, should your risk of death go up? Yes, that should be a causation. If we do expect that under the causation hypothesis, if your wife is improving your survival, if she dies, we expect your health to go up. We also expect it under the homogamy hypothesis, and we expect it under certain scenarios under the shared environmental exposure, like the radon in the basement. If the radon in the basement permanently marked you, then we expect that if your current wife dies, it should be a marker that you were exposed to radon. Or if it's a present risk, you and your wife both right now are exposed to radon in the basement. She dies from that exposure, your risk of death should go up. So the pattern we would expect amongst current wives and husbands is this pattern. What about ex-wife and ex-husband? Ex-wife and husband. We don't expect your ex-wife to be able to be improving your health right now. So if she dies, we should see no effect on you. But if it's homogamy, we should see an effect. If you are married, if healthy people married healthy people, then the death of your ex-wife, if your ex-wife dies, we should see a spike in your risk of death compared to men whose ex-wife did not die. And then we can also look at what we expect about the environment. For example, there should be an association or permanent. If you and your ex-wife lived in a house with radon in the basement a long time ago, her death should be a marker that you were exposed to something bad. And finally, we can look at the relationship, this is tricky, between your ex-wife's death and your current wife's risk. Does the death of your ex-wife, is it associated with an increase of risk of your current wife? How could that be? Well, we don't expect a causal effect. We would see that if there was homogamy or permanent shared environmental exposure. You're the kind of man who takes your women to radon-filled houses. So if your wife has died, your ex-wife has died, then your current wife should also die. What we found when we analyzed data of this very complex type was that there was no relationship between an ex-wife death, an ex-wife's death, and a husband's death, suggesting that homogamy and shared exposure were not the key factors. So we did not find that these patterns persisted. We only found this pattern. Okay? So this paper was published years ago Now, when we discuss social support, it's important to attend to several aspects of the support. How much support is there? What kind of support? What is someone doing for you? Is there reciprocity? Are they helping you and you are helping them? Or is it just perceived support? It's not real support. How many ties are there? How intimate are they? How long-standing are they? How interconnected are they? What is exchanged? How diverse are your ties? Are you connected to many different kinds of people? And social support is not the same thing as social networks, which will be discussed later in the course. And note also that social relationships can be burdensome and not just helpful. So for example, the people you're connected to, it's not just that they might be doing something good to you, they might also be burdening you. They're making demands, giving you lend them money, they're exposing you to secondhand smoke, intimate partner violence. Did you know that most women are killed by their lovers? 75% of women who are killed by their partner, okay? So having a partner is not necessarily a good thing. So, and they may impose all kinds of requirements on you. They may ask you to help them in various ways and do different sorts of things for them. Now the mechanism of this effect and the pathways of the effect of social support on health are complicated. For example, social isolation is associated with the onset of illness. For example, cardiovascular disease. So here's one illustration of a mechanism. If you're socially isolated and you don't have social support, it might increase your risk of coronary artery disease. This shows the adjusted relative risk and the level of social connectedness with respect to cardiovascular disease. So people who are fully integrated have no excess risk. Their adjusted relative risk is 1. And as you move down the ladder, so that people have more and more social isolation, their risk of death increases. So being lonely, not feeling lonely, being isolated is associated with an increased risk of death. And social isolation is also associated with the outcome of cardiovascular disease after its incidence. So for example, this shows the mortality after a heart attack depending on the number of sources of emotional support. You have 0 sources of emotional support, 1 source, or 2 more sources. This is a very famous study. I can't remember if it's in your readings or not. And we can look at now what happens in different groups of people, for instance, men, women, relatively younger, relatively older, or Killick class, that is to say, some measure of how bad the heart attack was, or the risk for heart disease was. And so let's look, for example, at young and old, first of all. We find that amongst the elderly, people older than 75, your risk of death, your mortality, can go from 70% if you have no social support to 25% if you have 2 or more sources of social support. So this is now what happens after you have a heart attack. So lacking social support increases your risk for having coronary artery disease. And then when you have it, when you have the heart attack, lacking social support increases your risk of death. Okay? And the more social support you have, the better. It happens in the relatively younger, 65 to 74-year-olds. It happens for sure in women and in men, although it's a little more complicated in pattern men. And it happens no matter your risk factor profile as measured by your Killick class. And the way social support was measured in this study was, can you count on anyone to provide you with emotional support, talking over problems, or helping you make a difficult decision? Do you have anyone like that in your life? Do you have one person like that in your life? Do you have 2 or more people like that in your life? And this study avoids the confounding of illness and support by measuring the support well before the illness. So they measure the support in a large cohort of people today, and then they waited until they had a heart attack, and then they looked at what happened to them after their heart attack, depending on the level of social support they had reported before. And this detail is important because when you're sick, so raise your hands if when you're sick, your friends rush to help you. Raise your hands if when you're sick, your friends avoid you. So you see it could go either way. Maybe you suddenly don't have any friends because you're sick, and so they don't want to be near you. You're not as much fun. They're not calling you out to go out. Maybe they don't want to get infected with whatever you have or whatever. Other people feel differently. So you can't be certain which way it's going. But if I ask you now, tell me about your friends, and you say, oh, you have many friends, you have few friends. Then I wait till you get a heart attack, and then I see, well, what happens? And you with more friends do better than her with fewer friends. So, and so they did a multivariate adjustment using numerous demographic and clinical attributes, and they found that having no emotional support was associated with a substantially higher risk of death, almost tripling the risk of death. And here's some results taken from your readings, looking at whether the diversity of a person's social support is beneficial. And this study comes from a very clever experiment that exposes people to an infection. It assessed the relationship between the social network diversity, the different kinds of people you might be exposed to. This does not mean ethno-racial diversity. And whether an exposure to a virus can make you sick. And they found a relationship between network diversity and infectability. So they measured like how various are the people you're connected to. You have high diversity, medium diversity, and low diversity. And then they showed the percentage of colds. And what they did here was very gross. They brought them into the laboratory and they put coronavirus, cold virus, into their noses. They dripped the coronavirus in, and then they kept them in quarantine, and they measured how long before they developed symptoms, how much snot did they produce by weighing their tissues. So every time you blowed your nose, you had to put it into a special place, and then they weighed the tissues to make sure that they could measure your snot, and they asked your symptoms, like how bad you feel. And they found that the higher your network diversity, the less likely you were to respond to this artificial infection that we gave you. All right? A very nicely conducted study. So having a lot of different people you interact with might help your immune system in some particular way. So the argument that social network diversity, as well as other attributes of networks, like their size or connectivity, which we'll get to later in the course, is salubrious, that network diversity is salubrious or health improving, rests in part on this kind of a causal chain which people are still trying to tease out. So maybe you have a more diverse network, this decreases your stress or improves your feeling of self-worth, or maybe directly results in some kind of hormonal changes. Your improved self-worth could make you change your hormone, less likely to release stress hormones when you feel great about yourself. Or you have decreased stress, you might have that. Or if you have improved self-worth, you might have better behaviors. When I feel good about myself, I drive more safely. When I feel bad about myself, maybe I'm a bit more reckless. And this could improve my host resistance if I have better behaviors. Or improve my hormone function, which could improve my host resistance and result in better health. So there could be some kind of complicated set of pathways that lead from greater network diversity to better health, including many or all of these types of pathways. And every step, every one of these orange arrows is the subject of a large research effort by many scientists. And this study is also valuable. The study that was in your reading where we put the coronavirus in your nose was also valuable because there was clearly no reverse causation there. There's no sense in which my having put coronavirus in your nose made you run out to have more friends, okay? Clearly it went from the diverse network to the having sickness rather than from the sickness to having the diverse network. Indeed, there are many mechanisms by which social support might be salubrious. It could buffer stress. Having friends makes you better able to tolerate stress. It could have positive neuroendocrine effects. It could have positive cardiovascular effects. We just reviewed a little of those. It could result in better sleep. So having good friends and friendships could result in better sleep and better physiologic repair. People have looked at this. This is also a mechanism. It could encourage you to have better behaviors. You have good friends or many friends. They could make you stop smoking or lose weight or exercise or behave better. It could provide for emotional support or practical support. If you have more friends, you might be better able to get money if you need a loan. Better access to information, like informational support. And it could promote a sense of meaning and coherence. People who feel embedded in social networks feel more connected to the world. But it may turn out that any kind of connection is helpful. So how could connection possibly help you? It might be, for example, connection to puppies. So it might not be to a person that is beneficial. It might be actually to just like an animal, for example, that could be helpful. This is a study comparing spouses to friends and pets. It took 240 married couples, half of whom had a pet and half of whom did not. And the pet owners are shown in the clear bars, and the non-pet owners are shown in the black bars. Then, while these people were at home, various cardiovascular parameters, such as their heart rate and in beats per minute, and their blood pressure, were measured while they were put under some kind of stress. And the stresses were twofold. Either their hands were submerged in ice water, or they were given complicated math problems. So the members of the spouse of couples were in their own homes, were now put into two different kinds of stresses. They were given complicated math problems, or their hand was put into a bucket of ice water. And then the experimenters randomly varied whether their spouse was present or whether their pet was present, to see which one of these might be better in buffering the impact of the stressful exposure. So let's look at the right panel first. If you look at the right panel, you'll see that the presence of a pet or a friend decreases cardiovascular reactivity while under stress compared to being alone. But having a pet is better for this response even than a spouse or a friend, okay? So just having your puppy present is better than having your spouse present or a friend present when I put your hand into ice water and measure your blood pressure. So this is the alone treatment. So remember the white bars are the pet owners and the black bars are the non-pet owners. So there's not much difference when you're alone in how your blood pressure spikes when I put your hand in ice water or give you a complicated math problem. Now what happens when I bring either a pet or a friend in? So the pet owners, when I bring a pet in, they really do great. Their blood pressure does not go as high when their hand is put in ice water. Compared to the non-pet owners who have a friend. They also improve by having a friend, but it's even better to have your pet if you're a pet owner than to have a friend if you're a non-pet owner, shown here. And here's what happens when you bring a spouse in. There's not as much of a benefit as a pet or a friend in terms of this stress, okay? So remember, earlier at the beginning of the lecture, I talked about how perceived connections could be as important as real connections. Even the perception of a connection to a pet, it's an actual connection, but it's not to a human being, actually can have a very salubrious impact. So the point is, it might not be connection to people that is important. It might be connection itself. And we're going to spend some time on this topic when we discuss social networks. So for some reason today, I'm done. Much faster than I expected. Maybe it's because I was speaking in such a pressured way. Does anyone have any questions about the topic we discussed today? Yes. Hold on. Anya.
Yes.
All right.
When you look at the effects of death of ex-spouses, was there any, or did people look at whether or not those exes actually lived together?
We did not look at whether they shared parenting. That's a very good question. It was very hard to get into the data that we got to do that study. So, Ronaldo, what? Murillo.
Yes. Is there any? Did anyone look at the effect of marrying a second or third time?
Yeah. So it's good if you have if you're divorced or die, you get benefits from a second or third wife. Yes, or husband if you're a woman. Yes.
No, I'm sorry. Like after you divorce.
Yes. After you divorce, you suffer, and then you get remarried, and then you improve again. And you guys probably have this experience yourselves. Like when you break up with a partner, you're really miserable. You think the world is over. No one will ever love you again. You'll never find anyone that fits for you. It's awful, catastrophe. You're depressed. You take to your room. You get the cold and the sniffles and everything else. Your friends are telling you, forget about the bum, and they provide you social support. And then time passes, you begin to feel better, and then eventually you meet someone else, and you're like, oh, this is great, and you're just back where you started. It's kind of depressing, actually. Yes, other questions? Jalen.
In the example when you were talking about basically having greater diversity in your social group.
I'm sorry, having what?
Having greater diversity in your social
Yes.
group and everything. When they gave them the code and you said they basically quarantined them. So how did was their friend group affecting them?
Well, I think the idea is that when you interact with more people, it strengthens your immune system, or you have a sense of I have a lot of social power. Like I have lots of diverse people that I'm interacting with. I'm getting a lot of kind of bennies from that. So then when I'm exposed to the stress of having this thing put in my nose, I fare better for a complicated set of physiological and social reasons. Other questions? Hold on. Lila. Thank you.
When women marry other women, do they get the 7-year benefit?
Yes, I thought I said that. Yeah, they get the 7-year benefit. So the men marry men get 2 years, and women marry women get 7 years. So it's marriage to a woman that's helpful. It's not the connection itself. And if you think about it just a little bit, it makes sense. There are two parts to connection that are important. The fact of connection and who you're connected to. Right? It's like marrying a rich guy versus a poor guy. There might be all else equal. The rich guy might give you something in addition that the poor guy does not give you. I'm not recommending picking people. I'm a marry who you love kind of person. But anyone who knows me knows it. But the point is, you should be able to have the intuition that it's attributes of the altar. So in network parlance, there's something called the ego and the altar. I'm the ego, that's my altar. It's not just the fact of a connection to the altar that matters, it's who the altar is that might also matter. And there's a strong hint of that in the marital widowhood literature. Other questions? Yes, I forgot your name. Jewel. Oh yes, I know your name. Jewel. Thank you.
Yeah, the question of the idea showed that the graph after the spouse dies, it affects the men more than the women.
Yes.
But if there's two women married to each other and the spouse dies, does it have that sharp effect?
No, I think the impact, this has not been worked out. They're very small samples of lesbian and straight couples, databases about them, lesbian and gay male couples, databases about them were sparse. Gay marriage only became legal recently and we started having records. As I said, with the men, it was devastated by the HIV epidemic, so it's really hard to make these inferences. And so I don't know the answer, but I would suspect it would be the pattern of a woman losing her spouse. It would be the impact. I think she would still have the female female ego response. So it wouldn't be as bad as if a woman, it would be worse for the woman who lost her spouse if her wife died than it would be for a woman who lost her spouse if her husband died. Did I answer your question? Yes, I think that's right. I'm guessing. Anya.
There's probably even less data on this, but has there been any looking into maybe fact death of spouses in a couple where one or both of them are trans?
No, no one's looked at anything like that. But people have looked at something else. So the death of a spouse who loves you is worse than the death of a spouse who does not. It's really sad. So and it makes sense. People have looked at quality of marriage and death of a spouse. So the widowhood effect is attenuated by poor quality marriages, which is not surprising. People have looked at intimate partner scales. You can measure how much spouses love each other. And so the death of a spouse who loves you is worse than the death of a spouse who does not. People have looked at, there are all kinds of depressions. So death of an uneducated spouse is less bad for you than death of an educated spouse. So basically it follows a lot of the patterns you would predict when you look at it for reasons you could imagine, right? So an educated wife is much better for my health than an uneducated wife is for my health, for example. Yes, Ben.
When it comes to pandemics and things like that, say like the new coronavirus, do you think that the network effects, like the benefit that you get from a diverse like network of friends, it gets flipped because then you have more?
Yes, I'll talk a little bit about this on Thursday. It turns out there's a sort of summary that a line I use in my laboratory, which is the spread of germs is the price we pay for the spread of ideas. So people who connect with more people derive a certain kind of power. They have more access to more information. They can form hunting parties more efficiently. But being connected to more people puts you at risk for pathogens spreading. So we theorized in my lab like 10 years ago and have since shown, well, I won't say shown, it's too strong a word. We've gotten a lot of suggestive evidence that there's a coevolution of friendship in immune systems for reasons you might imagine. So imagine from the point of view of an evolutionary system, you could either evolve to be a misanthrope, right, which would be really useful in the coronavirus situation, or you could evolve to have a strong immune system. Both of those could work from the point of view of protecting you from contagious diseases. So we would theorize, and this we have shown, that the immune systems of people who are popular are different than the immune systems of people who are not popular. They're stronger, basically, which is illustrated by the resultant diversity that I just showed you, okay? So those among you who socially isolate, don't have many friends or don't want to interact with your friends, actually can get by with weaker immune systems because you're not exposed to as much. Even on a genetic level, not just on a physiological level. A lot of suggestive evidence about that. Other questions? All right, so I will let you go early, and I'll see you on Thursday. We'll do contagion and the video, and we'll talk about coronavirus the next time.